Alright guys, autofanatic. I'm going to do a review today of the BMR linear specific GT350 Magnerite springs. These springs were specifically designed for the GT350 and also the 2018 performance pack cars with the Magnerites. Just to give you guys a little update, I've tested almost every vendor's suspensions over the years when it comes to this platform and even the newer Camaros, and I think and I feel strongly that BMR makes the best springs if you're the guy that wants the performance. If you're the one that wants to stance your car and slam your car, this is not the brand you're going to go for. This is the brand if you want the handling, you want the better launch off the line at the track, you just want better overall feel. This is going to give it to you, because every other spring that's on the market is a progressive rate spring. And in New York, with the roads and the oscillation of the back IRS on a lot of cars, the car just bounces and bounces and bounces out of control with a progressive rate spring, because the softer coils on the bottom are doing all your work most of the time. So this is a true linear rate spring. It's not a dual rate. They are rated at 980 pounds on the rear and 250 pounds on the front. The factory GT350 springs are 195 in the front and 914 in the back. The GT350R is 240 in the front and 914 in the back. So these are 250 front and 980 rear. So they're a slight increase over the GT350R. They're going to lower the car between 3/8 to a ½ inch. And like I said, some of you guys are going to say, oh, that's not really what I want to do, because everybody wants to lower the car and slam the car and you know, get the wheel gap and whatever. But theoretically, lowering the car and slamming the car and having 2 degrees negative camber is not the fastest way around any track or down the drag strip. It just doesn't work. On this particular car, and I've tested hundreds and hundreds of hours on this platform already, too much camber on this car, it just starts acting irregular. It feels all over the place. It doesn't launch right. When you enter a corner, it just feels really unstable. And that's why BMR designed this kit to lower it subtly. They're mostly doing it just to give it a little bit of lowering stance, but this particular performance upgrade is for the increase in spring rate to match with the already awesome magnetic ride control dampeners. So I'm not going to go into the install. I mean, you guys could go online and see a bunch of videos on that. CJ Pony Parts has probably the best install video on this from a couple of years ago. You got to pretty much tear the whole car down, drop the subframe, all that good stuff. So, and I want to give you guys some really good constructive feedback on this as an upgrade. Is it going to ride better? Is it going to handle better? Is it going to take impacts better? I already know from experience, because I've used all of their products before, you know, on my GT and on other customers' cars, and I know this is going to feel much more hunkered down. It's going to feel more solid, more direct. And you never know, maybe the car will feel like a Focus RS that's really high-strung and tight, which is really what I'm going for. But the one thing I noticed conventionally, like I said, I've been doing a lot of these suspensions since the S550 came out. The rear springs are extremely heavy by weight. These things feel like they're 15 pounds each. This has to be the heaviest rear coil spring that I've ever picked up for this application. So that's just something that I noticed. The front springs, nothing really special about them, but of course the coil windings are specific to the magnetic ride control cars. So I'm going to take a couple of hours. I'm going to break my car down. All the hardware is going to get changed on the front suspension and on the rear subframe. I bought all new hardware from my local dealer, and everything's going to get torqued to spec. We're going to let the car settle, go for a ride, and I'm going to give you guys some good feedback. And then in a couple of days, I'm most likely going to throw it on the alignment rack and dial in the front and rear toe. Camber is probably not going to be changed that much because the drop is so subtle, but if it does, I'm going to try to dial it back into OEM spec, and we're going to see how the car feels. So stay tuned for this video. And if any of you guys are looking for BMR suspension products, I'll put a code that they hooked me up with down below. You guys could get a discount, AutoFan7. Go to their website, bmrsuspension.com, and type that in. And like I said, the more support, the better, because then I could spend more money to buy more parts to test for you guys and give you guys some real-world advice and see what it does. So stay tuned, guys. I'll be back in a couple hours, and the camera in the car, we'll go for a ride, and I'll give you my thoughts as far as what I feel this does. And driving in New York is the most grueling, road conditions you're going to get as far as putting the suspension through its paces, through the constant up and down and oscillations because the roads are so busted up. So is this going to give more control? Is it going to give better ride quality? I kind of know what it's going to do, but let's get it in the car first, and I'll talk to you guys in a few hours. The back of this car is a lot easier to get the springs in and out than a standard S550, because when you lower the cradle on a standard S550, it sits on the rear exhaust pipe. But on the Shelby, they curve the exhaust pipe around the lower control arm. Another tip is remove the upper sway bar end link right here like I show you, and push the sway bar all the way up. You see what I'm showing you? Push it all the way up, then you take the spring, you grab it, and you twist it. As you twist it, the coil is going to come around the sway bar end link, and it pops right out. You don't even need to use a breaker bar. You don't need to pull down on it. As soon as you have a jack under there, take out the subframe bolts, drop it down, take out the upper sway bar end link, and let it hang like this, and then the spring pops right out. Just wanted to just show you guys. A lot of guys aren't talking about that. I did it just now. I had both sides done in about 40 minutes, and just saved a hell of a lot of time, whereas on the standard Mustang, the subframe would tend to rest on the exhaust, and unless you undid the exhaust hangers, certain springs you couldn't get in and out as easily without really going crazy. So stay tuned for the dry portion of the video. Pay attention to that tip I told you in the rear. Undo the sway bar end link. It makes it a hell of a lot easier to get that original spring out, and then you can just pop in the BMR relatively easily. So I got 196 miles in the car since they've been installed. There's a number of things I wanted to talk about and address. Now, before I go any further, I've already tested in this car, before I started YouTube, the Ford Performance springs, and I took them out because that's a dual rate spring, and it has a series of softer coils. And in New York, when your roads are blown out like Swiss cheese and they're like crazy all over the place, you can't really enjoy a car with soft coils, a dual rate, or progressive spring. That's just from experience. It just doesn't work around here. It makes the suspension go totally out of control, and I don't care which shocks you have in the car, you're never going to be able to control the body motions around some of these roads over here. So it's just too much stress, too much oscillation. The IRS goes crazy, and it just feels like crap. Now, I installed a couple of sets of the iBox for customers, and the iBox, according to the spring rates, are softer than the GT350 springs. Now, the guys I installed them for weren't really concerned about the performance. They wanted the look. So I think that's really the audience where iBox going with that. I don't think that's a spring that's going to be suitable to go on the track, or somebody that wants really, really hardcore performance. That's not going to work for me. I drove the cars. I didn't like them. That's just my personal opinion. You know, one guy did 21-inch wheels with those springs. It looked kind of cool, but it's just not really where I'm going with this. So the BMR springs lower the car, I think, just the right amount. You don't want to go too little. You don't want to go too much, because this particular chassis and a lot of cars with IRS, if you go too low and you get too much negative camber and you can't dial it back, I'm talking too much, I mean anything beyond 1.8 negative in the rear of this car, or even a standard S550 Mustang, it's all over the place. You can't get the balance, you can't get a good launch, the car just doesn't feel dynamic. It just feels like, yeah, you slammed it, but now you got to get the camber back into spec, and that's why a lot of companies are making camber arms and other stuff for the rear of this car, because the factory notch in the upper control arm could only get you so far. So if you're going to do like a coil over and slam the car, you're going to have a hard time getting it. I think the sweet spot in the back of this car is between negative 1.4, negative 1.2. That seems to be the best balance between street, autocross, track, all that good stuff. I mean, yeah, if you guys are hardcore tracking the car and you got a bigger contact patch in the car and some sticky race tires, you probably want to go down to like 2 degrees or whatever, but you have to factor in the alignment and everything else so it all works together. But the one thing I noticed, and I mentioned it when I had the springs on my bench, the rear springs in this car physically are probably the heaviest coil spring that I've put into this chassis of a Mustang ever. And I had an idea that when I put the rears in, I said, you know what? Let me bring the car down to the ground and let me road test it.
And when I road tested it just with the rear BMR springs in the car, I noticed that as soon as I pull out of my driveway, I have a dip, and I would always hit the front spoiler. I noticed there was a different compliance when I was hitting the bumps. It felt smoother. There was less like resonance coming into the cabin. I noticed less resonance in the plastics in the car. And overall, I think that's because the spring, yes, it has a higher rate, but maybe it's made out of a different type of steel, and it's physically heavier than the OEM spring. I've put them side by side in both hands, and the BMR spring physically is heavier than the OEM GT350 spring. So I threw the fronts in, and the one thing that I really got to say, the car rides better. And you wouldn't believe that increasing your spring rate and lowering the car a little bit is going to make the car ride better. But there's a couple of things about this car, even from the factory, that I always would complain about, especially on the front end. Whenever you would hit a bump, there would just be like this resonance that would feel unsettled, or it would sound like something was maybe loose under the front end of the car, with like a sway bar end link or something like that. But in theory, you know, I kept saying maybe it's just the Pilot Super Sport tires, because that feeling and that noise and that resonance changed when I had the Pirellis and when I had the P4Ss. So I kept blaming it on the tires, but now with the new springs and the slightly stiffer rate, that's gone. I don't hear it anymore. I don't feel it anymore, and I've hit some really bad roads in the last 2 days. And so far, that's probably the biggest thing that I like about this, is it feels more compliant when you hit bad roads. For any of you guys, there's a lot of guys out there that have these cars that don't live in Florida and don't live, you know, on smooth roads, and that's going to be something to think about. Don't go with a softer spring. This spring is slightly higher than the GT350R spring rate, especially in the rear. But like I said, you can't really go wrong with it. I think it's got the right rake, the right stance, the right rate. And I'll say it again, because I've installed a lot of BMR springs over the years on the Mustangs, the SN197s, the 5th gen, 6th gen Camaros, the ZL1s, all those cars. I still say, hands down, these are the best lowering springs you're going to get if you want performance. It may not be the best for the guys that want the look, but if you guys want what I feel, the best performance, the best ride, and the most versatile spring that's going to give you the best bang for the buck, these are the springs right here. I'm just not a fan of any progressive spring on any car. Okay, I just think they cause too many issues to get the rest of the chassis to balance out and to feel, you know, more put together than the way it is now. But another thing I noticed too is the car has much more bite when you're going through sharp corners and you accelerate. I could feel the inside tire just biting a lot harder than it used to. And that's because, of course, the back of the car is a little bit lower. You have much more spring rate. And the magnetic shocks seem to be perfectly matched with the lower ride height and the increased spring rate. So overall, guys, these things are a home run. 300 bucks, you can't go wrong. I'm going to put some before and after photos to show you guys, because I know everybody wants to know how does it look, whatever. I'll show you before and after photos with my car. You guys could be the judge of what you guys really want to do. And look, we're going to hit a big bump right now, and it's totally comfortable. I mean, you'll feel it, but you don't get that resonance anymore coming into the front of the car, and that just drove me crazy. So far so good. The only change that I'm going to make, we threw it on the alignment rack quick, and I did a quick toe change on the rear and the front. I didn't go crazy, but I'm going to bring it back to the rack maybe in the next 2 days, and I want to play around with the toe settings a little bit more. I may take some toe out of the rear. I may do a little toe out in the front. I don't know. I'm just going to play around with it and kind of see if I could change the feel of the car a little bit more for what I want. But as far as ride quality goes, all the modes of the suspensions, they work flawlessly. There's no fault codes. I didn't have to do anything to the computer of the car. I did disconnect the battery when I was doing this because I unplugged the mag ride shocks, and I just do that for precautionary measures. You may or may not have to, but I would suggest that you go do that. And like I said, I'll put a link in the description of the video. If any of you guys want any products from BMR, they hooked me up with a code, AutoFan7. go on their website at checkout, put that promo code in. You guys are going to get a discount, and that'll be good to go. And if any of you guys want to see more BMR products or suspension-specific products out there, post your feedback below, and I will pretty much pick them up, spend the money. These parts aren't given to me for free, and I'll throw them on the car, do some testing, give you guys a real-world video as far as how do they work, you know, to drive the car daily. How are they going to work when you hit bumps? Is it going to, you know, degrade the performance? Is it going to increase the performance, and vice versa? And like I said, I think it's all subjective, but, you know, I don't really want to hear a guy that does suspension upgrades that drives on smooth roads in Florida or California, because that's not really going to relate to my needs, or the guy in Ohio, or the guy in Michigan, or the guy in Chicago. So that's kind of like really where I want to go with a lot of this technical stuff when it comes to suspensions and setups and even braking, is how are they going to work on these conditions, which are the least ideal conditions, and pretty you know, hard for any car to cope with them. But this car is great. I mean, no complaints whatsoever. I actually think it improved the ride quality, improved the grip, improved the steering response, and improved the cornering just enough that you could actually notice that you spent $300, you spent a couple of hours of labor, and now you get back in the car, you noticeably are going to feel the difference. So any questions, comments, post it below. If you guys got these springs, I'm sure you love them. I'm sure you're tracking the cars. Post your feedback below. But like I said, if you guys got the Progressive and you like that too, you know, you're just a different driver than some of us out here that we want a tighter, firmer, linear rate spring, and BMR makes the best springs for GM and Ford performance cars. So see you guys soon. Autofanatic at yahoo.com. Questions, comments, post them below. And go to bmrsuspension.com and type in AutoFan7 at checkout and get yourself a discount courtesy of BMR Suspension. See you guys soon.